Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in this wonderful world of ours. My name is Scott, and with me today, as always at this time, is Trina Paulus, who is author of Hope for the Flowers, but so much more, because for the last 50 years, and for many years prior to the publication of Hope for the Flowers 50 years ago, Trina has been a very close observer of, well, the human condition. And so one of the things that we had decided to do was to come to you every week for about 15 minutes and talk about essentially whatever it is that happens to be on Trina's heart. And your heart is kind of heavy lately, hasn't it been, Trina?
Yes, it started with the whole Korean realities of the dumping of the wastewater from Fukushima into the ocean. And we talked about that. And then we invited in a beautiful testimonial with that sign that's behind me, the Together sign, to the struggle for a peace deal between North and South Korea to help unify them, reunify them. 70 years since the end of that war and still no peace treaty. And one of the things that came clear with that whole effort, and now with what's happening in Gaza and Israel and the blow up around the world of that situation, it looks like the Korean peace treaty is going to be put on hold. It looks like almost everything is put on hold that's important in the world story. So, Scott, one of the things I was thinking might be a way to move into this very, very conflictual situation is for me to tell sort of the story of my life about how I've come to where I am right now today. Because right now, probably when we get off of this, I'll be joining the power hour of the Jewish Voice for Peace. Now, I'm a Catholic, practicing Catholic, but I'm preferring to work with this group that's been around a long time, working for justice for the Palestinians as Jewish, mostly women. And they have this power hour during this crisis time every day at 3 o'clock. And you can join Jewish Voice for Peace and just get on those wonderful half hours where they help you move out to our legislators and see what we do about our own involvement in this thing, because we are involved. There's no question that you and I, with our taxes and our way we talk about it, we're involved. So let me go to the more beginning of my life. I was born in 1931 in Cleveland Heights, in Ohio, by people who came from 40 miles away from the country, from the farm. And the farm was extremely important to me as I grew up. I sat with the chickens, I sat with the cows. I petted the horse, the old horse that was there. My my uncle did not have any electricity on the farm. In fact, they only got water during the time that I was there, running water in their kitchen. So that was the time I grew up. And we grew up and took many of these practices into our own homes. And we always did gardening and composting in our backyard in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, which is where I grew up. And I want to skip quickly through to where my relationship with this present controversy is. But I grew up with that kind of a thing with parents, by the way, who I never heard say one word against an ethnic group of any kind. So although we were in a white community with not many Catholics and not many Jews, we were all mixed together with mostly white Protestants on our 90 people street. So that was my growing up. It was white. It gradually became very Jewish, and then it's become very black. My mother stayed there all her life, and she died at 104, but not there. She went blind at my age, at 92. She was blind already. So I grew up and I was graduated from school in 1945. And I had watched the war through Life magazine every Friday. I just devoured that magazine because that's how I knew what was going on. It was by Life magazine's coverage and the beautiful photographs it always had. And of course, an occasional newsreel. But that's how I grew up. And I remember Pearl Harbor. And we were together at a museum, and we came out and we were announced that we were at war. And then in 1945, I remember Hiroshima. And I remember being at my grandmother's place and running across the yard thinking, how could a little bomb, a little atom do all this? And then there was Nagasaki. And then the state of Israel was formed. And all the people who lived there in Palestine were driven out into the desert. And then I said, I have to understand more about this. And I remember being on the subway and walking around with the book Exodus by Leon Urich, which was a very pro-Israeli book. But I was trying to understand how the Jews were trying to get on boats and nobody wanted them. We didn't want to take them all into the United States. Europe didn't want them. At least that's the way it was put forward, and probably largely true. And the Zionist movement was pushing very much for all Jews to go to Palestine. And so right before 1948, there were enough Jewish people there that there was this effort and this big fight to push them out of Palestine and take their homes and destroy their olive trees. And they've been in the desert and in Jordan and all place else and not able to ever return. And all of these things are against our war crimes, are not supposed to happen. An invading community should be taking back the refugees that have to leave. But I was very much part of that culture at that time and did not understand that very much. But then in 1966, 65, I had an invitation to come to Akhmim, Egypt, the oldest continually inhabited city of 50,000 people in the Middle East, Akhmim. It was in the center of the country. And we were on the less developed side. And can you imagine? I had the chance to live where it was really an ancient culture. There was practically no electricity. We had some in our place. And we had an old Christian site that was there in the midst of the Orthodox community, and 2/3 of the Muslim, 1/3 Christian, 2/3 Muslim. That's pretty high. And 50,000 people there in the town. It wasn't a town. It was not a village. It was a city. And a bridge had just been crossing the river at that point to take us over to where the railroad station and city life and stores and other things like that were 5 years before I came. So it was pretty interesting to be there with a mosque on the other side of the street and looking down and hearing the men iron their clothes with the coal in the thing and hearing, oh, bump, 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 as they ironed. That was a male job. That was not a female job because those irons were so heavy. And they also did the weaving in the town. So I was brought over to take some of the old Coptic motifs that were very famous in this part of the country and help the girls become a cooperative that made embroidery. And while I was there, I helped start a whole little artist group of the girls who were trying to get into the club. But so we just go ahead, bishwish, be careful. Yalla, it's beautiful, go ahead. I didn't need much Arabic to work with them like this. And they shared so much with me. I grew so much from them. So in 1967, the Six-Day War came. And there I was, a blonde American, 38-year-old. And what did they do with me? The war was already lost the first morning, but the Egyptians didn't know it. We knew it because of shortwave radio. And so my French leader at that time for this international group, the Grail that I worked with, said, you have an hour to get ready, Trina. You're going to go. And you're going to go on the train at 9 o'clock to Cairo so that you can get out. Because one bomb would have destroyed the road and the railroad and cut Egypt. It's only one road, one railroad, up and down in Egypt. It's a very fragile country. There's the Nile, and on the other side of the river where we lived, the road and the railroad. And then the rest of the country, 96% is desert. So it's not an easy country. And so I hurried up and did that, and there I was then on a train. We didn't speak any English on that trip up to Cairo. And then I was there sitting in it. And at night making a decision to go or not, because we had to be in a Nile hotel on Thursday night if we wanted to go. And so we sat there in a blackout, and it wasn't dangerous anymore, but the Egyptians didn't yet know it, that they'd lost the war, and it really wasn't dangerous. All we saw was tracers going throughout the sky like the 4th of July. And a Muslim poet was there with us, Sayyid Agab. And he said something that is wrong, as basic to this situation that we're in. The West has sinned against the Jews and has asked the Arabs to do the penance. The West has sinned against the Jews and has asked the Arabs to do the penance. That's not the only thing we have to pay attention to, but it sure is pretty basic. Because when I was in Egypt the first time, right before this, Israel was already existing, but Jewish people were friends of ours in Cairo and were living there relatively peacefully. So were Christians. So although it was Muslim dominated, it was under Nasser a socialist country. And for instance, the girls in my town were very, very poor. But because of socialism, nobody died like in Calcutta. Nobody died of hunger or starvation. So they had the basics: oil, pita bread, flour, and things like that were available to them. And although very poor, their life was relatively secure. And I found they discovered and they cared about the same things I did, whether people treated them right in the club, whether people talked behind their back, even though they had dirt floors and a little peg to hang their clothes on a earthen wall, and one big tub in which to make their bread and to also wash themselves, and a little Bunsen burner to cook on. They were poor, but their charity and their love and their cooperation and their joy of just being together at our co-op with their plastic bag filled with their embroidery and their threads and taking off their black burqa, because once they had puberty, they wore this sort of black cloth over them until they got to our place and then took it off and just enjoyed being an ordinary kind of dress. So that was my experience. And then I was evacuated and went back then 6 years later when I was allowed to go back, and was there again for a while and came back here and decided this is the most important place, the United States, to work with because of our influence in the world. It's so huge. It's so huge. And the desires that we have and the revolution of rising expectations that we send around the world. By the way, when I was there, the most popular movie in the place was Sound of Music. They just loved that movie. It was like in its 4th year. And there were other kinds of awful gun and violent movies. And I remember in Agmim, some little kids passing by with placards on them with the symbol of the movie MASH. That's really sexy, humorous movie that was almost a tongue-in-cheek thing against war, with the big woman's helmet and a sexy leg sticking out of the helmet. Perhaps you remember that. But there were these little kids carrying it through, because there was one cinema there that, of course, only the men went to, where the movie MASH was being, and they went through their little drums and everything. That's how the movie was advertised, by that method when I was there. Okay, so that's my experience there. And now with these other things that have happened, I've been then very much acutely, therefore, aware of these events in the Middle East and follow them quite closely. All the problems of Gaza, all the many attacks on Gaza, and the one a couple of years ago that was especially atrocious, where the people were coming up to the edge of the fence where they're in this open air prison. They can't get in or go out. There's no freedom at all. And they were walking up to it, and there were snipers on the other side just shooting purposely at medics, journalists, and also shooting people in the legs. So there were lots of amputations and lots of people in wheelchairs. And there was totally no arms at all used. So it wasn't Hamas. It wasn't organized by Hamas. It was people working for the right to return to their homelands, not to be kept in the Gaza prison like they were. So what's happening today and why I'm choosing to go into this like I am is because most of the media now is almost gone on away from it and keeps, and our president and my are involving me in supporting a very one-sided thing. You have an explosive situation here where young men who have grown up in this kind of a situation finally exploded. But that doesn't represent all of the Palestinians who are now suffering the brunt of this. So the babies and the children and the women, many of them cannot move. They're told to move to a smaller place with no place to be, or to move out into a desert and for Egypt to take them. And they can't go. They're too old to go, or they want to stay and take care of those who are too young or too old to go. And so that's what we're at. And every minute we wait, there's more slaughter going on as we speak on this video today at 2:30 Eastern Time on Monday, the 30th of October. And there's many thousands have been killed already, and many more thousands will be killed if this carnage continues. So without food, medicine, water, electricity, or able to travel and no place to go, and bombing all the time, it is equivalent to what? What do you call that? It's equivalent to death by one means or another. And I just can't let this happen on my watch without saying something strongly. And so this is my most public forum, so I'm daring to say it today. And I belong to the Jewish Voice for Peace, and I'll soon get off and be on that 3:00 Jewish Voice for Peace program, which I go to almost every day, and that they have it. And so, dear people, think where you're at. Don't let your government just make you a willing tool of something that's wrong, and get our Congress to choose differently, and let us push not to be exporting death and weapons of war as our primary export in this world. What an awful thing to be first with. And we are right now. So, Scott, after this big, long thing, I don't know where we're at even with our timeline. So thank you for being patient with me.
Oh, well, who cares about time? It's just the perfect time. And I think that you've just beautifully expressed and laid the stage, laid the context for what's going on. I know that people first got to know you because of Hope for the Flowers, but there's just so much more to you and to your message. So thank you for that.
Okay, a couple more. I would really recommend you might think about joining Jewish for Peace. There's other peace groups out there, but this is a good one, and it's led by mostly Jewish women. It's led by Jews, so that seems to be a good thing, and they're working for justice, Jews for justice, and Jewish Voice for Peace. You can just look that up. You'll get on. And yes, and also one of the people I listen to a lot these days who's pretty solid is Gary Knoll. He's on Progressive Radio Hour. That's PRN.org. PRN.org. It's a computer radio station. And so I find him pretty solid in what he's been saying. And I followed him for many years. And today he had Abby Martin on, who has been in Gaza so often. So today's broadcast is well worth your listening to again and looking it up. There are a lot more beautiful people, most of whom are on Substack. Another wonderful article is Dennis Kucinich, Thou Shalt Not Kill. And he talks about the division between East and West, which is in process of happening. And if this goes further and further and further, and we have a fight between the East and the West, we know what that's going to be. That could be the end of everything that we ordinarily struggle for. So let's put our shoulders to the wheel of learning and being open to lots of points of view. So I'm very concerned about the censorship that doesn't allow multiple points of view, because that's how we learn, folks. That's how we learn, hearing different sides to the same story.
And what I've observed oftentimes is that we listen and we hear a lot of things, and years later it separates the wheat from the chaff. And years later we find out that many of the things that maybe had not hit the mainstream media actually were true. So it's really hard to be able to separate the noise from the signal. But there are signals out there that we don't all get, and we're all kind of captive to the vertical in which we live, the news sources that we choose to go to, and it just takes I don't know, a little bit of
Well,
discernment.
I would look up Dennis Kucinich, and if you have to look it up in Substack, you might find him just straight. Thou shalt not kill. Pretty basic stuff in it. And he was pushing while he was in Congress until he was gerrymandered out of his seat. He was pushing for a Department of Peace. That was his call. So he's a pretty authentic politician that I really trust a lot. And look him up and look up some of these others. And you can find a bunch of good people on Substack who have been uh, put out of the mainstream media. So look every place. That
And
remark and everybody.
and also people can go to hopefortheflowers.com and navigate to the contact page and contact you directly, can't they, Trina?
Yes, they can. But wait, I don't have any of this political stuff on that page, on that program right now. I'd like to be able to say some more stuff on some other places, but uh,
And there's always the Facebook group Hope Revolution. Many people are watching on that channel right now. If you happen to be watching on YouTube, you can navigate to and join the the Hope for the Flowers Revolution Facebook page easily by going to your main website, hopefortheflowers.com.
main website, hopefortheflowers.com, and the Facebook group indeed is Hope for the Flowers Revolution. You have to put that whole thing in there for that.
Yeah.
But that's available from the website if you are interested in joining. And we should do more with that group. It's hard for me to know how to put my own energies these days, folks, and probably you have the same experience. Where do you put your energies?
So
Where?
any final words before we go, Trina?
Well, I wish you all peace. And we've done this other beautiful program that Scott is done, and I will be putting it up sometime, or extra or whatever, called Butterflies for Peace. This is about the relationship, and the butterflies don't have walls.
So what we'll do is that we'll post that on the Facebook page right after this broadcast, first thing right after, and people can watch that as well. It really is a beautiful, beautiful video of you. And butterflies galore in your backyard.
And recent, just in the last couple of weeks, since all
Yeah.
this horrible stuff has been going on. Here we have the butterflies flying to Mexico. Hopefully, many of them have arrived by the Day of the Dead, which is a couple of days from now. It's All Souls Day in our English words. It's the day we think about the veil between heaven and earth being very thin and transparent, and we can be close to our loved ones who have passed on.
And with that, I think that we should close today's program, but we'll be back at 2:30 again next Monday, Eastern Time. And thank you ever so much for viewing. And Trina, thank you for your very thoughtful and perceptive insights that you share.
And Scott, thank you for your patience and your support, because you don't do these things by yourself, folks. We need each other in this world, like those hands say.
True words. Thank you all. Bye-bye.